Hey guys, welcome. Tonight we drift into the quiet chambers of an old Roman mind, one whose voice still echoes like wind through olive branches. You're barefoot in the dust of ancient Rome, walking a worn stone path that smells faintly of fig trees and old parchment. It's nearly dusk, and the sky is the kind of soft orange that makes you forgive the day, no matter how it went. A fountain murmurs in the distance, but otherwise, everything is still. You step gently into a garden walled off, private, serene. The city hums somewhere beyond, but here, it's different. A man sits alone by a pool of water so still it mirrors the cypress trees like ink on glass. His robe is simple, his fingers steeple together in thought. He is Seneca, philosopher, advisor, exile, and let's be honest, reluctant babysitter to a notoriously unrestrained emperor. But tonight, he is just your companion. He gestures wordlessly, and you sit beside him, the stone warm from the day's sun. This is not a place for lectures or stern eyebrows or rigid virtue charts. It's more like falling into a gentle current, a slow unraveling of how quiet power works. If you tried living like a true Stoic today, your boss might block you for ghosting every Slack thread and declining every optional meeting. But that's not what Seneca asks. He doesn't want you to disappear just to be selective about where your energy flows and when. So before we settle in, take a second to tap like or even subscribe only if this quiet space feels like home to you. And I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it? Now ease off the brightness, maybe let a soft breeze hum in the background, and let's wander gently into tonight's story together. You sit with Seneca, and he says nothing for a while. You notice how rare that is. Not awkward silence, but chosen silence. A kind of silence that feels like a skill. You start to wonder how often do you fill the air just because it's empty, and how different would life feel if you didn't. Seneca picks up a small stone, weighs it in his palm, and then doesn't toss it. He places it down again with care. This, too, is restraint, the tiny instinct to act gently overridden by a quieter instinct to observe. That's where his kind of power begins, not in domination, but in decision. He wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But what if the inverse is also true? What if peace begins in imagination too? Here, in this imagined garden, you're already a little freer than you were an hour ago. Long ago, restraint was not glamorous, still isn't, especially in an empire where golden goblets are cheaper than self-control. Seneca was mocked, envied, dismissed, even accused of hypocrisy. And to be fair, when you're writing essays about frugality while managing a portfolio that could buy half of Iberia, you're gonna get some side-eye. But maybe that's the paradox we need. Restraint doesn't mean you're empty-handed. It means you hold without squeezing, that you could, but you don't, that you know what would impress the crowd and choose not to. One old story claims Seneca kept a garden that was almost aggressively boring. No fountains, no peacocks, just herbs and plain benches. A visitor once asked him, "Why not plant something beautiful?" Seneca shrugged. "I like the soil more than the flowers." Was it true? Who knows? Philosophers still argue whether Seneca was the real deal or just a gifted PR man in a toga. But the idea sticks. Restraint is its own aesthetic, not flashy, not designed for applause, but comforting in its confidence, like those rare friends who don't interrupt or rush or need to be right all the time. They just sit with you and you feel better. That's what tonight is about. In the distance, Rome buzzes, taverns clatter, streets pulse. A senator's voice rises in angry Latin. But here, in this strange and sacred pocket of stillness, you're learning a new kind of luxury, the kind where nothing has to happen, where silence isn't emptiness, it's generosity. Modern thinkers often critique Stoicism for promoting emotional numbness, but that's not what restraint means. It's not absence, it's presence with patience. Feelings still rise, still swirl, but you don't chase them. You let them pass like clouds while you stay grounded. breathing like an old tree. Seneca believed in preparing the mind the way you'd prep a house for winter. Patch the leaks, stock the cellar, know that storms will come, but you don't have to shatter with every gust. Restraint, to him, wasn't about denial. It was a form of readiness. You hold back, not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to wait. A small breeze stirs the cypress trees now. The leaves whisper secrets you can almost understand. You lie back on the stone bench beside the old philosopher, and your eyes begin to soften. You feel your body remembering its own stillness. No drama, no urgency, just breath, and the hush of someone who mastered the art of not always needing more. Somewhere in the heart of the eternal city, not too far from the marble echoes of ambition, a banquet unfolds. You find yourself there, though you didn't quite mean to attend. You weren't invited, technically, but dreams don't bother with formalities. The air is warm and thick with roasted meats. Garlands of ivy droop from stone arches, and someone's cousin is already on their third goblet of wine. Gold clinks on porcelain. Laughter erupts, a bit too loud for the hour. You walk past platters stacked with figs, honeyed dormice. Yes, those were real. And jugs of wine so perfumed they smell like a Dionysian candle. The whole thing glows like excess wrapped in silk. It's impressive, maybe even tempting. At the far end of the table, there's Seneca. You notice he hasn't touched the sweet cakes, nor the sparkling amphora of Falernian wine that's made two poets pass out mid-sonnet. A servant offers him something glistening on a skewer, maybe eel, maybe peacock. Maybe both. Seneca lifts a hand gently. He doesn't speak, just declines. And you watch closely, because there's a strange magic in that gesture. It's not defiant. It's not smug. It's simply enough. Restraint in the middle of abundance isn't easy. You know this. 100 times a day, you stand at some invisible table, one more scroll, one more cookie, one more ping that could wait but won't. In modern terms, Seneca would be the person who turns off their phone at 8 p.m. and doesn't check it until sunrise, which, frankly, makes him kind of hardcore. But it's not about asceticism for its own sake. He wasn't trying to be miserable. He just believed that self-control was a kind of muscle, and muscles need small daily exercises. So while the empire practiced indulgence, Seneca practiced decline. There's a famous letter he wrote many to his friend Lucilius, where he says, "Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare. In other words, rehearse poverty, not because you want to suffer, but so, when hardship comes, you'll be calm, and when luxury comes, you won't drool." Still, people thought he was eccentric. Who rehearses hunger when the table is full? Well, apparently you... Because in this dream, your hands hover over a platter of roasted dates, warm, glossy, perfect, and you think, maybe just one. But instead, you pause. You notice the way the scent hits the back of your throat. You admire the symmetry of the fruit, the folds of caramelized skin, and then you don't eat it. Not because you're trying to be good, just curious. What happens when you don't give in? This is where Seneca nods. That moment between want and action, it's tiny, but it's where freedom lives. Philosophers argue over whether we ever really have free will, whether our choices are just neurochemical echoes of childhood or caffeine or some long-forgotten ad jingle. But even if it's all illusion, Seneca believed in cultivating the pause, that one breath where you ask, "Do I need this?" or just want it? And in that breath, something uncoils, something quiet and powerful. You don't feel deprived. You feel strangely full. Here's a fringe anecdote for you. Some modern scholars claim Seneca would eat plain porridge 3 days in a row, not because he loved oatmeal, but because he wanted to remember that contentment isn't a gourmet dish. Of course, he also dabbled in gourmet real estate and had a rather cushy villa in Baiae. So yes, irony is alive and well in every century. Still, the lesson breathes. In a world where status was worn like perfume, where emperors drank pearls dissolved in vinegar just to flex, restraint wasn't boring, it was radical. It said, I don't need to impress you. I don't even need to please myself right now. I'm practicing power from the inside out. So as the banquet goes on around you, you begin to feel lighter, not hungry, exactly, but sharpened, like your senses have uncluttered themselves, like you're watching indulgence swirl around you, but your feet are planted deeper than before. You find a quiet corner, pillows, a gentle view of the moonlight playing on rooftops. You lie back, eyes soft, stomach quiet, and for once, you're not chasing anything. You're not swiping, scrolling, picking, chewing. You're just breathing. One philosopher, centuries later, said that desire is a contract we make with ourselves to be unhappy until we get what we want. Seneca might chuckle at that, then pour you a cup of plain water and call it a feast. Tonight, that sounds like just enough. The palace is gone now. The banquet has melted into mist, as dreams do. You're walking down a long colonnade where the shadows stretch like soft ink across the stone. Somewhere above you, pigeons coo in their rooftop chapels. Your sandals whisper against the floor. And you begin to notice just how often the word no has been misunderstood. In most dreams, no is the villain denial, rejection, an abrupt end. But here, in this slow unfolding vision, no is something else. It's not harsh, it's not cold, it's not even final. It's beautiful. Because no can be the quiet scaffolding of peace. Seneca believed that a person who cannot say no is a person who will be owned by appetites, by moods, by the next shiny thing. So he practiced, he trained himself, not to be rigid, but to be free. And freedom, he wrote, is not needing to obey every impulse that knocks on your door. You stroll past a small fountain, its gurgle soft like a lullaby. A pigeon hops near your foot, looks up as if to say, try refusing something today. Even if it's just the third video in a row. Even if it's just the itch to check who liked your last post. This is the training ground. No spears, no marches, just micro refusals, mini retreats from the edge of overdoing. And what if you fail? Well, of course you will. Seneca did, multiple times. Remember, this is the same man who wrote about living modestly while collecting villas like sandals, but he kept returning to the practice of restraint, like a pianist returning to scales, not for show, for sanity. One odd story that floats through historical rumor tells of a party where Seneca simply left when the music got too loud. No speech, no scandal, just a smile, a nod, and a gentle disappearing act. Guests were baffled. Was he insulted, ill being mysterious? Nope. He just didn't want to shout over the liars. That's the kind of no we're talking about. And here's where philosophy gets deliciously messy. There's still debate over what kind of Stoic Seneca really was. Hardcore purists like Epictetus thought you shouldn't even wince at a broken leg. But Seneca, he allowed for nuance. He thought people could be wise and still annoyed, still drawn to beauty, still tempted by status. The trick wasn't to be a robot. The trick was to be aware and to decide, gently, when to abstain. It's unclear if Seneca meant his kind of restraint to be a moral absolute or more like a practical balm. Some letters hint that he saw it as preparation for crisis, others as an everyday aesthetic. Either way, the thread is this restraint isn't something you do to impress anyone. It's what you do so that your soul has a little more room to breathe. You reach a marble alcove where a cat naps in the sun. Even it seems to be practicing restraint, choosing stillness over the chase. You sit beside it, not petting, not disturbing, just watching. That's something Seneca encouraged too, watching your own reactions like a kindly observer, like a patient friend leaning against the wall at a party, sipping water and thinking, there goes my ego again, doing pirouettes. It's a soft form of discipline, not asceticism, not punishment, more like self-tending, like pruning a vine so it doesn't strangle itself. Modern thinkers might call it impulse control or delayed gratification, but those terms feel so sterile. Seneca's way is warmer, more poetic. It's the art of gentle refusal, the dance of desire and dignity. And you can feel it in your own body now. A quiet unfolds in your chest. Your breath slows, your limbs soften. There's nothing you need to say yes to right now. No pressure to respond, react, indulge. The world will wait. You lie back on the cool stone and close your eyes. You imagine Seneca not as the statue, not as the stern senator, but as the tired man who has finally learned that not every invitation deserves an answer. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is smile and say nothing. No, thank you. You're reclining now, somewhere between dream and memory, in a quiet chamber lined with scrolls. Not the dusty, brittle ones from museums, but soft, fresh parchment, each rolled and tied with calm purpose. They smell faintly of ink and olive oil soap. This is Seneca's study, or maybe it's your own. In dreams, the two are interchangeable. You drift past the shelves and notice that every scroll bears the same elegant name, Lucilius, Seneca's pen pal, his distant friend, his philosophical diary with a postage stamp. He wrote more than 100 letters to Lucilius, some short, some winding, all shimmering with restraint, not just in content, but in tone. Even when Seneca was raging inside, he composed his words like water cupped in calm hands. That, too, was part of the Stoic exercise. And here's the surprising thing, most of these letters weren't really meant for Lucilius. They were meant for the future, for you, for anyone trying to live wisely in a noisy world, for people who wake up anxious and fall asleep with YouTube autoplay humming in the background. Seneca anticipated this. In one letter he wrote, "I am writing this not only for you, but for myself as well. I am letting my own soul know what it should prepare for." You read those words aloud now, and it feels like someone just dimmed the lights in your mind. Because you remember how often you've written something down, not to share it, but to see it, to pin it gently to the wall of your awareness, to say, "This is what I want to remember," when the cravings roar. Tonight, Seneca whispers those reminders to you. Things like, if you live in harmony with nature, you will never be poor. Or, he who is brave is free. But most of all, he returns again and again to this: restrain yourself. Want less. Choose your reactions. It's easy to forget how radical that sounds in a world that screams, want more. Own more. Say everything, instantly. But in this soft-lit study, you begin to see the quiet heroism of doing less, of being deliberate, of taking the slower sentence. You sit at a table now. A scroll lies open before you. The handwriting is firm, a little slanted, full of breath. It's one of Seneca's less famous letters. But tonight, it shines. He writes about not attending certain parties, about refusing invitations. Not because he's antisocial, but because he wants to protect his peace. You chuckle. Imagine texting your friends, "I'm practicing philosophical restraint tonight." Rain check, you'd probably get a thumbs down emoji, maybe even a pizza gif. But Seneca would understand, because he saw social obligation as a stealthy trap, something that often pulls us away from the inner work of simply being, of noticing our thoughts, of asking, do I even want to go, or am I just afraid of disappointing someone? That's restraint, too. Not just saying no to the chocolate cake or the new sandals, but saying no to the fear of being misunderstood. You stand and move toward the window. The city is quiet now. The glow of oil lamps flickers like sleepy fireflies across tiled roofs. Somewhere, someone's singing badly, but sincerely. And in that soft darkness, you feel something curious. Not pride, not stoicism with a capital S, just ease. A sense that you're not being pulled in 5 directions anymore. That, for tonight, your center is holding. Scholars still debate whether Seneca wrote these letters as therapy or performance. Was he trying to soothe himself or craft his legacy? The answer is probably both. Like most people, he wanted to be remembered well, and also, genuinely, to feel less scattered inside. We all do. That's why restraint isn't just about holding back. It's about gathering inward, reclaiming your attention from the thousand little leakages of modern life, one breath at a time. You look back at the scroll on the desk. One line stands out now. We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment of them. You repeat it, slower. You let it settle behind your ribs. It's not about erasing judgment. It's about softening it, not reacting to everything, letting some things pass like the wind, not because you're cold, but because you've chosen calm. The room fades slowly. The scrolls seem to dissolve into night. The ink runs into the stars. And you feel it again. Not silence, but space. A hush that isn't empty but full of gentle possibility. You drift now through velvet curtains into the wings of a Roman theater. The scent of old wood and rose oil still lingers in the air, along with the remnants of someone's overacted monologue. A golden mask lies forgotten on a bench, half smiling, half weeping. The show has ended and the stage is dark. This is where Seneca once stood, not just metaphorically, but quite literally. Few remember this, but Seneca was also a playwright. His tragedies were soaked in blood and revenge, passion and gods, thunder and grief, and yet, he lived by the principle that true strength lies in restraint. The paradox is delicious, a man who penned stormy characters and frenzied soliloquies, yet quietly insisted that in life, the wisest thing one can do is exit early, gracefully, without needing applause. You walk the stage now, its board smooth beneath your bare feet. You imagine the audience robed senators, chatty matrons, wine-soaked youths waiting for drama, craving action. But Seneca's lesson echoes in your mind. The most powerful line in a play is often the one not said, the silence that hangs like a held breath just before someone chooses to walk away. Tonight, you learn that restraint is not absence, it's not passivity, it's a dance, a timing, knowing when to speak and when to let the curtain fall. In one letter, Seneca mused that most powerful is he who has himself in his own power. A phrase easy to embroider on throw pillows, harder to live when your ego is itching for a spotlight. But he meant it. He'd seen what happens when you chase every ovation. You end up a slave to noise. He watched it happen to Nero, the emperor, Seneca's troubled student, demanded performances, flattery, songs about his jawline. The more he craved attention, the more monstrous he became. Seneca, meanwhile, began rehearsing his own quiet exit. He would later write that life is like a play. It doesn't matter how long it runs, only how well it's acted. And the mark of a good actor, he believed, is knowing when to step back, to leave the audience wanting less. It's unclear if he was thinking of his own impending departure when he wrote that. Scholars wonder whether Seneca, caught between power and ethics, was trying to script his own redemption. Maybe, maybe not, but the wisdom stands. You sit now in one of the empty audience seats, cushions a bit worn, the smell of incense clinging to the velvet. You watch your own life unfold on the stage, not all of it, just the moments when you said too much, or stayed too long, or tried too hard to be understood. You wince, but then smile. Everyone forgets their lines sometimes. Then you watch the scenes where you paused, where you said no, where you turned inward instead of retaliating. Those are quieter, subtler, but somehow they glow. Restraint, Seneca believed, is not about shrinking yourself. It's about shaping yourself like a sculptor removing what doesn't belong. You don't become less, you become clearer. A story floats to you now, strange and oddly funny once. Seneca was invited to a recitation by a pompous young poet. The reading went on for hours. Guests fidgeted, someone fainted. Seneca endured it in silence, then left with a small bow. Later, he sent a note. "You write well. especially when you are brief, a restrained insult hidden in a compliment, masterful. Restraint can have wit, too. Modern thinkers sometimes accuse Stoicism of being anti-expression, but they miss the artistry. Restraint is not the absence of feeling, it's the deliberate choreography of it. It's knowing that you don't have to narrate every discomfort, justify every exit, or prove your worth in fireworks. Seneca didn't want silence because he was hollow. He wanted it because he knew how loud the world could get. You close your eyes now, seated alone in that shadowed amphitheater. You imagine the velvet curtain lowering slowly. No clapping, no curtain call, just a soft creak of ropes and wood. A final scene, delivered with poise. And you realize something: the curtain doesn't always fall because the play is over. Sometimes it falls because you've chosen to rest. The theater sleeps, so do you. Now you're in a different kind of chamber, smaller, tiled, ornate in all the wrong ways. The floor is inlaid with mother of pearl, the ceiling glitters with imported glass, and in the center, absurdly, magnificently, stands a chamber pot made of gold. Yes, gold, heavy, lavish, utterly unnecessary, Nero's idea of subtle decor. You step lightly around it, amused and maybe a little queasy. A servant once whispered that Nero had it crafted not for comfort, but for spectacle, because nothing says divine emperor like using the most precious metal on earth to relieve yourself. And in the corner of the room, silent but very much present, stands Seneca. He doesn't mock, he doesn't scoff, he simply observes. This, too, is restraint. He could have ridiculed Nero. Many did quietly, after dark, with the windows closed, but Seneca, even while mentoring this volatile volcano of a man-child, kept his sarcasm wrapped in patience. Most of the time. You notice his robe is simple, his sandals dusty. He stands like someone who carries no extra weight of gold or ego. This moment staring at the chamber pot of a man who will soon unravel Rome teaches more about Stoic restraint than 1,000 scrolls. Because restraint isn't always visible. Sometimes it means keeping your mouth closed when history begs you to scream. Seneca once wrote, "We must tame the tongue," and tonight, that line loops in your mind like a lullaby with teeth. Because yes, there are times you want to lash out, fire off the perfect clapback, drop the mic and walk away. But most of those moments, in hindsight, turn to ash. What remains? The dignity you didn't trade for fleeting satisfaction. Scholars still wrestle with how Seneca survived so long under Nero. Some say he was complicit. Others believe he stayed to protect what little sanity remained in the court. There's no tidy answer. But he navigated a court of monsters with something sharper than a dagger-quiet composure. In one peculiar anecdote, it's said that when Nero demanded a new ode praising his latest haircut, Seneca praised the emperor's restraint in not writing it himself, a compliment laced with enough irony to make Cicero blush, but delivered calmly, gently. That's the art. And that art lives on. You sit now on the edge of the golden absurdity. It doesn't even look comfortable. Like most luxuries when seen up close, it's all shimmer, no warmth. Restraint, by contrast, has a softness, a depth. It doesn't need to prove itself. It just is, like a quiet room in a noisy palace, or a moment of stillness in your own mind. Modern thinkers often question whether Seneca truly lived the Stoic ideals he preached. After all, he was wealthy, connected, politically powerful at least for a while. But maybe that's the point. Restraint isn't renunciation, it's discernment, having and not being had, owning without being owned. In your own life, the gold may look different, a scream, a craving, a desire to be right. But the question remains, can you step back? Can you laugh gently and walk away? Tonight, you can. You feel it now, in your shoulders. That release, the moment when a tension you didn't know you carried, dissolves. You're not clutching anything, not defending, just here, breathing, present, unimpressed by glitter. You lie down on a cushion near the wall. The mosaic above you shows a peacock, wings outstretched, mid-prance, a perfect metaphor for indulgence. Beautiful, hollow. Seneca sits beside you now and says nothing, just nods. Maybe he's remembering the same thing you are, that so many things in life are shiny on the outside, but ask nothing of your soul. And then he smiles. It's unclear whether he ever used this chamber. Maybe he refused even that. Maybe he wrote a letter about it, lost to time. But the image endures not because of the object, but because of the man who stood beside it, unimpressed. That's the kind of strength no empire can mint. You close your eyes now, a little wiser, a little lighter. You'll remember this room, but not because of the gold. You're drifting again, softer now. The edges of the dream rubbed smooth like old stone steps. You find yourself floating just above a grand Roman amphitheater, the marble bleached by centuries of sun. The seats rise in wide, curved arms, all facing a stage that waits empty, expectant, echoing with applause long gone. Tonight, though, there is no performance, only the wind weaving gently through stone, and Seneca sitting quietly in the upper tier, just below the shadow of an old pine. You settle beside him, invisible in this dream that bends time like soft wax. His robe flutters slightly, and his gaze lingers on the stage, though no one stands upon it. He leans toward you slightly and says, not with voice, but presence, you do not need the crowd. You look down. You see your own life acted out moments when you sought approval like water in a desert, the perfectly timed joke, the overcommitted calendar, the frantic reach for validation dressed as productivity. None of it shameful, just noisy. Seneca once wrote, "What you think of yourself is much more important than what others think of you." A sentiment that sounds empowering in daylight, but takes on deeper meaning when whispered at midnight, when the crowd is gone, and the silence asks, do you like who you are, even when no one is clapping? That's what this space teaches. A mind undisturbed by applause is a fortress. Not a fortress of steel and ego, but of softness, of resilience, of knowing you are enough without echoes. There's an old story, probably apocryphal, but irresistible nonetheless, that Seneca once attended a performance of his own tragedy. The audience wept, gasped, stood at the final line. But Seneca, he left before the curtain fell, not out of arrogance, but because he didn't want to become addicted to the ovation. Restraint is hardest when it's praise we're holding back from. The sweet seduction of well done, the click, the like, the nod. But applause, like wine, is intoxicating, and intoxicants cloud the compass. You walk now across the empty stage, your footsteps soft as memory. You think of the times you performed without knowing it, played a role, smiled when you wanted to retreat, laughed when you wanted to rest. Seneca sees this too, and he doesn't judge. He understands the temptation. He lived in the court of one of history's most dramatic emperors. He knew theater, but he also believed that the best performance is the one you don't need to repeat. That's the scholarly tension here, because while Seneca preached withdrawal from praise, he was also a skilled rhetorician, a best-selling author, a man of letters and legacy. Was he sincere, was he posturing, or was he merely navigating a world where being heard meant sometimes playing the part? Modern thinkers argue this point. Some call him hypocrite, others a master of surviving without losing his soul. Maybe both. That's what makes him human. You step down from the stage and feel free. No one claps, no one notices, and it's perfect. You find a seat beside Seneca again. The wind shifts, the moonlight lays across the floor like a silver shawl. In this dream, there's no audience, only you, and the awareness that your worth does not hinge on reaction. You lean back. A deep exhale escapes your chest. Something old and tight uncoils. You don't need to prove anything right now, not to strangers, not to friends, not even to yourself. You are not a brand. You are not a highlight reel. You are not a punchline in someone else's script. You're here, alive, quiet, enough. And as you close your eyes in this ancient theater of marble and moonlight, you sense what Seneca always tried to teach, not in thunder, but in silence. You don't have to be seen to be real. Now, the scene shifts again, gently, like fabric turned in a breeze. You're no longer in stone halls or echoing theaters. Instead, you find yourself in a small, tucked-away tavern at the edge of a Roman village, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for quiet. The sign outside doesn't even have a name, just a painted vine and a faded amphora. Inside, everything glows amber. The oil lamps flicker with that tired grace that only comes from long lives and low ceilings. There's a low hum in the room, not of voices, but of presence, of people drinking slowly, talking sparingly, letting time pour like honey. You sit at a simple wooden table, its surface smoothed by years of elbows, dice games, and patient waiting. A man with a weathered apron sets a cup before you, not wine, not water, something in between. It's a metaphor, of course. That's how Seneca speaks. The drink is restraint itself, subtle, heady, strangely clarifying. You take a sip. It tastes like discipline softened by time. Seneca once warned against the dangers of being intoxicated by abundance. He didn't mean just wine. He meant everything: information, luxury, gossip, emotions, the endless swirl of more. He believed in savoring what is simple and enough, like a wine left undiluted, not because it's strong, but because it's real. And yet, he wasn't a monk. He didn't live in a cave. He rode in comfort, traveled in style, dined with emperors. That's the tension. Can one live amid abundance and still drink slowly, still sip with restraint? You swirl the cup in your hand, watching how the liquid clings to the edge. The scent is earthy, not seductive, honest. There's a story here, maybe true, maybe just poetic, that when Seneca visited a friend's villa, he would compliment the plainness of the bread before tasting the wine. It wasn't performative. It was a reminder comfort is sweetest when it's not expected. And that is what this dream tavern feels like. A space where nothing is demanded, where your thirst is met without being teased into more. Philosophers still debate how Stoicism handles pleasure. Some say it's grim, suspicious of joy. Others insist it's about purification, not deprivation. The Stoic doesn't reject pleasure. They just refuse to be owned by it. That's what you're tasting tonight. The tavern hums on. A lute plays softly from a shadowed corner. A woman with ink-stained fingers scribbles lines of poetry onto a wax tablet. No one asks for more. No one claps. Everyone just is. And you feel the strange comfort of not needing to reach, to want, perhaps, but gently, without grasping. This is what restraint offers: not a world without flavor, but a world where flavor doesn't become a trap. You take another sip. The drink deepens, not in taste, but in meaning. You remember moments in your waking life when you gulped at joy, at success, at love, afraid it would vanish if not consumed instantly. Seneca would smile at that. He'd remind you that real satisfaction lingers when you don't rush it. Modern life doesn't reward slowness. There's always another reel, another deal, another dopamine ping. But in this dream tavern, no one scrolls. No one checks the sundial. Time is not currency here. It's company. You lean back. The bench creaks softly, like an old friend stretching. Outside, crickets begin to sing a lazy, threadbare rhythm. The air smells like lemon leaves and distant fires. And as you finish the last sip, you feel a new kind of fullness. Not bloated, not heavy, just settled. Seneca believed that temperance, this kind of soft inner moderation, was the foundation of liberty. That, to be free, you had to learn not to be dragged by every thirst. You feel that now, in your bones, in your breath. The tavern fades slowly, not with a goodbye, but with a nod. The cup dissolves in your hand like mist, and the taste, delicate and quiet, remains on your tongue. Not sweet, not bitter, just enough. You find yourself now in a place you've never been, but somehow recognize. A courtyard half in shade, half in sunlight. Vines curl lazily over stone arches. There's a gentle rustle of fig leaves. A few birds chirp like philosophers too small to take seriously. And yet, they keep trying. You smile. At the center of the courtyard is a man sitting calmly with a length of iron chain in his lap. But he is not a prisoner. No guard stands watch. No gates are locked. The chain isn't even fastened. It simply lies across his thighs, like a question. You approach, and he looks up with a serenity so profound, it feels like silence incarnate. He holds the chain not tightly, but with intention. These, he says softly, are the chains I chose. Seneca's voice, not quite his, echoes gently through the stream, and suddenly you realize you're not in a prison. You're in a metaphor, and it's about to get interesting. Restraint, in the Stoic sense, is often confused with suppression, but Seneca saw it differently. He believed that freedom does not mean no boundaries. It means choosing the right ones. He once wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." In self-mastery, he insisted, isn't just about enduring pain, it's about choosing limits that serve you. The man in the courtyard shows you the chain again. You see that it's marked with small engravings, moments of choice, a missed temptation, a pause before anger, a decision not to escalate. Each link, a quiet triumph. Here's the paradox you're drifting into now, the idea that restraint is not captivity. It is, in fact, the opposite. A life without boundaries, Seneca warned, is like a ship without a rudder tossed by every whim, every passing gust. Scholars still debate whether Seneca meant this literally or metaphorically. Did he really think that external freedom meant nothing without inner governance, or was this a survival tactic, his way of finding control in a political climate that gave him none? Perhaps both. The beauty of Stoicism is that it doesn't demand a perfect answer, just a better question. And tonight's question is this: what chains have you chosen? You walk the perimeter of the courtyard. In one corner is a tall bronze mirror. It shows not your reflection, but your distractions glowing, buzzing, stacking endlessly. You see notifications layered like ivy, half-finished thoughts, forgotten intentions. All of them tug at you, subtle chains you didn't realize you wore. Seneca would ask, did you choose those chains, or did they choose you? In another corner, a scroll lies open. It contains your daily calendar, meetings, errands, messages, expectations. None of them evil. But are they yours, or are they just inertia? The man in the courtyard, your guide. Your mirror leans forward now and says, restraint is when you carry only what you meant to. And suddenly, it clicks. You don't need to drop everything. You just need to stop dragging things that don't align with who you are becoming. There's an odd little story, not well known, about Seneca and a freed slave who stayed on as his servant. One evening, the man asked Seneca why he never locked his bedroom door. Seneca replied, because the worst thief I've ever known lives in my own head. That kind of honesty requires restraint, too. The courage to sit with your mind, not run from it. To notice your hungers, your habits, your fears, and not panic. Restraint doesn't silence the noise. It just teaches you not to dance for it. You return to the man and sit across from him. He gently places the chain in your lap. It's lighter than you expected, almost warm. You don't lock it around your wrist. You simply hold it, a symbol, a practice, a vow whispered so quietly, even your ego can't hear it. From now on, you'll choose your chains. You lean back on the sun-warmed stone, eyes soft, breath slow. There is no prison here, no audience, no judgment. Just you and the strange, wonderful paradox of restraint. Limits, chosen freely. The fire crackles gently now. You're sitting with others, faces you don't fully see, names you don't need. The flame draws soft arcs of light on the stones, flickering like thought itself. No one speaks much. It's a gathering without agenda. The kind of quiet company that doesn't demand anything from you but presence. Seneca is here too. He's seated closest to the fire, his robe drawn just above his ankles, a posture neither rigid nor slouched. He's listening, always listening. This place is old, not ancient like Rome's temples, but older like something woven into the bones of human rest. You realize this is not just a fire pit, it's a ritual. The kind of moment Seneca treasured, a pause from ambition, a campfire of calm. He once wrote, "As is a tale, so is life, not how long it is, but how good it is what matters." Tonight, the tale is quiet, but the goodness, oh, it's here, warm against your palms. You notice how each person around the fire has created a kind of invisible boundary. Not walls, not barriers, just space, respect, stillness. This is what Seneca meant when he spoke of the inner fortress, a place inside where you're no longer ruled by other people's noise. It's not isolation, it's insulation. That was always his nuance. Seneca didn't suggest you become a recluse in the hills. He wasn't asking you to flee the world. He was offering a tool set for surviving it with dignity, with clarity, with a certain fireproof heart. There's a tension here. One philosophers still wrangle with, can you remain emotionally open and still maintain stoic distance? Can you love without losing center? Seneca believed you could, but only if your emotional life was governed not by storms, but by principles. Tonight, you're feeling that balance. The flame reflects your thoughts, but doesn't feed them. You're here, in your body, in your breath. Your emotions rise and fall like the embers. No need to extinguish. Just watch. You remember a strange little tale, likely embellished, but irresistible nonetheless, about a servant who once dropped a goblet in Seneca's villa. It shattered. The room froze. The servant waited for punishment. Seneca merely looked at the shards, then said, "I was done with it anyway." Restraint in its purest form, not just anger withheld, but perspective applied. How often do we hold tightly to what we no longer need? Arguments, wounds, offense. Around this fire, you begin to see how many things you can simply let fall without reacting, not out of apathy, but because your peace matters more. The wind stirs. Someone adds a small branch to the fire. Sparks rise like ideas not needing answers. You wonder now, what does your own inner fortress look like? Is it built from walls or from gentle truths? Does it protect you from pain? Or just remind you who you are beneath it? Seneca would say your fortress isn't escape. It's essence. It's the place you return to so you don't get lost in the crowd. In modern terms, you might call it boundaries, emotional resilience, calm detachment, but here, it's simpler. It's knowing that your joy isn't a faucet others control, that your anger doesn't need to be your compass, that you can sit by a fire, hear a story, and not feel compelled to interrupt with your own. You reach down and trace a circle in the dust with your finger, a symbol of containment, not confinement. The fire crackles again, softer now. Someone begins to hum just a single note, drawn out like a thread of silk. The group doesn't join in, they just let it be. You close your eyes. This, you realize, is what restraint makes possible, a world where you don't have to react, where you can sit with heat and not burn, where you can witness without needing to control, where stillness is not emptiness, but strength. The wind presses gently against your cheek. The warmth of the fire stays with you, but doesn't demand anything. And inside, you feel it. Not a fortress with walls, but a center with roots. The fire fades behind you now, a warm memory tucked into your chest like an ember. You're walking again, through a long colonnade that smells of waxed wood and sun-warmed linen. The world has shifted shades, more still, more internal. You turn a corner and find yourself in a room as modest as it is serene. It's not what you expected, not ornate, not grand. This is the philosopher's closet. A small cedar trunk rests at the foot of a sleeping mat. 2 tunics hang from a wooden peg, their folds soft and uneven. A worn pair of sandals sit neatly beneath a stool. There's a mirror with no frame, just polished bronze. On the wall, a shelf holds a comb, a cup, and a few letters tied with twine. This is what Seneca kept, or rather what he chose to keep. Restraint, you realize again, isn't about deprivation. It's about discernment. The philosopher's closet is not empty, it's intentional. You run your fingers across the hem of the tunic. It's coarsely woven, not unpleasant, just honest. A scholar might call it homespun, a minimalist might swoon, but to Seneca, it was something more a daily practice in clarity. He once wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." And here's the irony. Seneca was, by many accounts, wealthy. He owned properties, had influence, entertained elite guests. But this closet, the one in your dream, tells another story. A story of someone trying, daily, to remember what actually matters. There's a fringe anecdote, rarely told, that Seneca once spent a week wearing the same rough cloak, walking the streets of Rome as an exercise in humility. When asked why, he simply replied, "So I won't fear it, if it ever happens for real." That's restraint, too, practicing loss so you won't be paralyzed by it. You glance around this room and notice how peaceful it feels, how unburdened, how light. In modern times, restraint often gets bundled with decluttering or capsule wardrobes or anti-consumerism. But Seneca wasn't about trends. He was about training. He didn't want you to own less to appear virtuous. He wanted you to be free from the kind of wanting that colonizes the soul. And here's the scholarly tension. Some argue Seneca couldn't have truly believed in this simplicity while also managing imperial finances, that he was playing philosopher by day, but living banker by night. But perhaps he wasn't pretending. Perhaps he was struggling, practicing, returning again and again to what he believed, even if he didn't always live it perfectly. That, too, is restraint, to keep trying to align your outer life with your inner values, even if they occasionally clash. You open the cedar trunk. Inside are a few scrolls, a clean cloth, a sealed pouch of dried herbs. The scent, faint lavender and myrrh, calms you instantly. You close the lid. You don't need more than this. Not tonight. You sit on the mat. It gives a soft sigh beneath your weight. You imagine living here not forever, but for a day, a week, a breath, just long enough to remember how little you truly need. And that's what Seneca would offer, not a blueprint, but a recalibration. He'd ask, what can you live without, not as punishment, but as revelation. You look in the mirror now. The bronze is old, slightly warped. Your reflection bends. Not unpleasantly, just enough to remind you that identity is flexible. You are not your closet. You are not your cravings. You are what you choose to keep and what you've begun to release. You lie back now, the room humming around you with a gentle dignity. There are no piles here, no clutter, no urgent notifications scribbled on parchment, just space, air, a closet that says this is enough. And in that, there is rest. You're standing on the edge of a field now. The sun is low, casting long golden lines through olive trees. A warm breeze moves through the tall grass like a whisper too shy to speak up. And just ahead, near a dry stone wall, stands an archer. She is young, maybe 20, with a linen wrap across her shoulders and a bow as tall as she is. A single arrow rests nocked and ready. Her feet are planted, her breath is slow, but she does not shoot. She holds, and holds, and holds. This is what restraint looks like in motion, or rather, in stillness. Seneca often spoke of the virtue of withheld power. It is not that we do not have power, he would say, but that we have chosen not to use it. You take a few steps closer, careful not to disrupt the air. The archer doesn't flinch. Her eyes stay fixed on a target that may not even be real. Or maybe the target is the act of holding itself. We're taught from childhood that action is king, that progress means movement, that potential must be converted immediately into performance. But here, in this dream space, Seneca whispers something different. The wisest among us are not those who act the most, but those who can wait the longest before acting. This isn't passivity, it's precision. You sit quietly on a mossy stone. The archer breathes in, then again. She lowers her bow slowly, doesn't release, doesn't apologize. She simply walks away. Somewhere, you feel the script of your own habits stretch and crack, the places where you've drawn the bow of your emotions ready to fire an opinion, a judgment, a reply. How often have you loosed arrows you later tried to gather back? Seneca would have you train instead in the art of non-launch. There's a peculiar story, half legend, half lesson, about a moment in Seneca's life when he was insulted publicly by a minor senator. The room froze, waiting for the retort, but Seneca only smiled and said, "If I had not heard it, I might have believed it mattered," then turned and walked away. That, too, was a kind of archery. The target wasn't his critic. The target was his own reaction, and he missed it on purpose. Philosophers debate how sustainable this kind of restraint really is. Can anyone live in a state of constant deliberation? Doesn't it make one slow, indecisive, even disconnected? But Seneca would reply, better to delay than to regret. Better to wait one breath longer than the moment demands. That space between impulse and action is where character forms. Modern thinkers might call it emotional regulation, self-awareness. But here, tonight, it's simpler. It's a string held tight, a decision not yet made, a thought unspoken. And it's powerful. You rise from the stone and walk slowly across the field. Each blade of grass bends beneath your step, then rises again. The world does not break when you pause. It balances. In the distance, you see the archer again, now seated under a tree, polishing her bow. She hums quietly, not in triumph, but in ease. Because sometimes the victory is in not shooting, in walking away from the performance, in being content with strength unspent. And you begin to see your own moments of withheld power, the messages you didn't send, the arguments you didn't escalate, the "I told you so" left unsaid. You might be the archer more often than you think. You sit under another olive tree now, cool and shaded, and let your breath align with the earth's slow rhythm. You feel your pulse, not rushing, not rising, just resting. Seneca would call this the virtue of the drawn bow, not for show, not for noise, but for what it reveals, that you are capable, that you could, but that tonight you don't. You walk now up a narrow staircase, the kind that coils like a thought rising slowly. The stone is warm beneath your bare feet, its edges smoothed by centuries of sandals and contemplations. At the top, a small wooden door creaks open with that familiar dreamlike weightlessness, and suddenly, you're above it all. You've stepped onto a balcony that overlooks the Roman market, the Forum, its heartbeat still pulsing even as the day winds down. Below you, people bargain over figs and bronze trinkets. Orators gesture dramatically at corners that no one really listens to anymore. Children run, chasing each other through columns. A dog sniffs at the hem of a senator's robe. And there sits Seneca again, quiet, composed, not hiding from the market, but not tangled in it either. This is what he meant when he spoke of observation without absorption. You lean on the balcony beside him. The wind moves through your tunic. From this height, the chaos below becomes choreography. The noise softens into texture. What once felt urgent now feels optional. Seneca gestures toward the crowd. "It's not that you must avoid life," he murmurs, "only that you must not drown in it." This is restraint in another form, not just holding back from indulgence, but stepping back from entanglement, watching without being pulled under, existing without losing yourself to the noise. In one of his more pointed letters, Seneca described walking through a busy market and feeling not exhilarated, but fragmented. I returned, he wrote, no wiser, only more scattered. That line stings a little. You recognize the feeling. After the scroll, after the feed, after the whirlwind of other people's opinions. But Seneca didn't say stay away. He said return to yourself. There's a subtle but vital difference. The Stoic doesn't escape the world. They just don't let the world rewrite them. Philosophers still question how possible this really is. Can one truly live in society and remain untouched by its anxieties? Seneca seemed to believe you could, but only through regular retreat. A daily balcony, even if only imagined. You close your eyes for a moment. Listen. The market below continues. Coins clink. Voices rise. A vendor calls out something about salted almonds. But you up here, you are not part of the transaction. You are not for sale. You feel that now the power of perspective, the way distance itself can be a kind of boundary. Restraint doesn't always mean saying no. Sometimes it just means stepping far enough back that you can see clearly. There's an obscure little tale that Seneca, when overwhelmed, would trace circles in the sand with a stick, not for magic, not for geometry, but for mindfulness. The world shrinks, he supposedly said, when you give your thoughts a fence. And this balcony, it's a fence, a sacred overlook, a place where you remember that not every urgency deserves your reaction. You open your eyes again. A heated debate has broken out near the temple steps. Two men waving scrolls, each more convinced than the other. You watch. You do not choose sides. You do not descend. Not from cowardice, from clarity. Restraint, in this form, is spatial. It's not always about food or wealth or silence. Sometimes it's about choosing your altitude. How many of your own tensions, you wonder, are magnified because you stood too close? How many problems are tall only because you are kneeling? Tonight, you stand, you breathe, you observe, and you stay soft. Because that's what Seneca understood too, that detachment without compassion becomes arrogance. But observation with warmth, that's wisdom. You sit beside him now, cross-legged on the balcony. You feel the air cooling, brushing gently past your arms. The world continues, but you are still. The form doesn't miss you, and you don't miss being in it. You are present without performing. You are in the world, but not consumed by it. And in that space, held gently by distance, you rest. The city fades into twilight, and the balcony's edges dissolve as if drawn in chalk and gently erased. Now you're somewhere more formal, yet strangely quiet. A long marble chamber, its columns tall and echoing, its benches empty for now. This is the Senate not at its loudest, but at its most honest. Here, power usually shouts. Here, the air often swells with the weight of speeches crafted to dazzle and intimidate. But not tonight. Tonight, there's just one voice, low and deliberate, a whisper, really, and it belongs to Seneca. He's not addressing the full Senate. He's speaking to just one man, or perhaps none at all. Maybe he's speaking only to himself, or to time, or to you. But his words carry weight, even in hush. You sit on a stone bench, polished smooth by centuries of posturing. And in this moment, what strikes you most is how restraint can be political. Not with slogans or signs, but with silence, with subtle refusals, with the decision to shape power rather than be shaped by it. Seneca knew this intimately. He navigated the corridors of imperial influence with the grace of someone who both respected power and distrusted it. As Nero's advisor, he often found himself in the terrible position of trying to steer a chariot already galloping toward madness. And what was his tool? Not confrontation, not outrage, but whisper. He once wrote, "A sword never kills anybody, it is a tool in the killer's hand." That was his subtle commentary not just on weapons, but on politics, power itself. He knew was morally neutral. It's restraint that gives it shape. You look around this empty Senate and imagine the echoes of history, the arguments, the threats veiled in praise, the cheers that drowned out reason. And yet Seneca, somehow, remained intact for longer than anyone expected, not by shouting louder, but by speaking less. There's a fringe tale, mostly legend, that during one particularly volatile debate, Seneca leaned in toward another senator and whispered only this: "The louder the speech, the smaller the soul." He said nothing else, and the senator, flustered, forgot his entire argument. Philosophers still argue whether Seneca was complicit in Nero's tyranny or a reluctant participant trying to minimize the damage. The records don't agree, but maybe that's the point. Maybe restraint in such a world is always imperfect, part protection, part compromise, part courage. And yet, Seneca never stopped writing, never stopped pointing, quietly, to a better way. You step down from the stone bench and walk toward the speaker's platform. It's oddly small. From here, you'd have to raise your voice just to be heard, but instead, you try what Seneca would do. You whisper, a simple line, "Let reason govern impulse." And though your voice barely stirs the air, it seems to fill the entire chamber, not with noise, but with something deeper, something that lingers longer than volume. Because restraint, in its finest form, doesn't suppress truth. It elevates it, makes it clear, deliberate, impossible to ignore. It teaches that what is said with calm conviction often outlasts what is screamed in fear. You step back from the dais. Let the silence reclaim its place. Let your breath match the stillness. This, too, is activism. Not the kind that marches, but the kind that holds steady. That doesn't react to every provocation, that refuses to mirror the madness of its opponents. Modern life celebrates loudness, urgency, hot takes, and quick judgments. But here, in this old room under the fading torchlight, Seneca reminds you of another way. To act with restraint, even in a world that begs for performance. To choose your battles and your silences with the same care. To whisper only what is essential and then let the silence do the rest. You sit once more, not to speak, but to stay still in a world that rushes. You wake into a deeper part of the dream now. No cities, no temples, no politics, just a room small, circular, and strangely bright without any visible flame. The walls are smooth, pale stone, and in the center sits a lamp, but not the kind you know. It glows without fire, no wick, no oil, just a steady golden light that pulses slightly, like breath. As you draw closer, you feel it more than see it: warmth without heat, illumination without smoke, presence without spectacle. Seneca once wrote, "A mind in harmony with itself is a fountain of light," and now that line doesn't feel metaphorical at all. It feels literal. This is the kind of light he meant: inner, unhurried, constant. You sit down beside the lamp, crossing your legs like a child about to hear a bedtime story. Only the story tonight is yours, told not with words, but with warmth. Told not to dazzle, but to reassure. Restraint in this quiet sanctuary becomes something else entirely. Not refusal, not boundary, but inner fire. Seneca believed that true radiance comes not from conquest or charisma, but from the soul that has stopped leaking energy into every distraction, the soul that tends its own flame. There's a quiet scholarly tension about this. Some say the Stoics were too self-contained, too focused on inward calm while the world burned around them. Others argue that it's precisely because the world burns that we must guard this inner glow, because it's the only thing we actually own. You reach out, slowly, and place your hand above the lamp. It tingles light without weight, a whisper of warmth that says, "You don't need more." You breathe, How many days have you chased your own spark in the wrong places? Clicks, cravings, constant comparisons, that draining need to feel lit up from the outside. Seneca would gently shake his head, not to judge, to remind. He saw it all, the marble palaces lit by 1,000 torches and the men who sat in them, afraid of the dark inside themselves. One peculiar tale lingers in the margins of his biography. It's said that Seneca refused to install lanterns in certain rooms of his home, choosing instead to navigate by memory. "I know where the furniture is," he explained, "and I'd rather learn to trust myself than blame the dark." Whether or not it's true, the idea shines, restraint as trust, as intimacy with one's own inner structure. You glance again at the strange lamp. Its glow doesn't flicker, even when you exhale sharply. It doesn't compete with the sun. It doesn't need an audience. It just exists. And it's beautiful. Modern wisdom might frame this as inner peace or emotional regulation. But here, in the room with no ceiling and no corners, it feels holier than that. It feels like remembering. You've known this light before, in the pause before saying something cruel and choosing silence, in the decision to walk away from what once obsessed you, in the moment you turned down the volume, not of music, but of your own mind. Those were your lamps, quiet and steady. Seneca would say, don't just light them when it's dark. Keep them burning always, especially when the world tries to convince you to reach for flashier flames. You lie down on the smooth stone floor. The lamp stays near, humming softly, not in sound, but in presence. And it offers no sermon, no command, just warmth, just being. This, too, is restraint, to carry light without flinging it in every direction. To let your clarity illuminate only what you choose to see. To glow, not to impress, but to survive. You close your eyes. The room does not darken. You don't need a fire. You are one. You're walking at dawn now. Not rushing, not heading anywhere in particular. Just letting the city unfold beneath your feet like parchment softening in warm hands. Rome is quieter than you've ever known it. The wine carts haven't started rolling. The market stalls still sleep under linen shrouds, and even the fountains, usually gurgling with confidence, seem to murmur instead of sing. The world is slow, and beside you, Seneca walks too. His hands are clasped gently behind his back, his steps measured, his eyes not locked on the horizon, but on the present, each crack in the stone, each wildflower pushing up from a wall. You match his pace, not because you're trying to learn something, but because slowness in itself is the lesson. Seneca once wrote, "Hurry is the mark of a confused mind," and this morning's stroll proves him right. You feel it already. Each breath becomes more deliberate, each blink less rushed. Even your thoughts begin to stretch, to yawn, to uncoil from the tight knots they wore yesterday. Restraint, here, is temporal. You are no longer sprinting toward answers. You're strolling through questions. The city begins to stir. A baker opens his shutters. A boy washes cobblestones with a bucket too big for him. Someone yawns from a balcony and waters a potted plant without noticing you. And you keep walking, without agenda, without destination. That's the quiet rebellion of this moment. There's a strange and lovely story tucked into the folds of Stoic lore. It's said that Seneca, even at the height of his political entanglements, would insist on taking his walk at dawn, refusing to begin correspondence or meetings until he had paced the garden slowly, once or twice, while the light was still undecided about being day. Scholars wonder whether this was philosophical or just old man habit, but the impact is clear. Slowness protects clarity. And clarity, that's freedom. Today's world may laugh at such a luxury. Time is money, after all. And yet, here in this lucid drift through Roman morning, you sense the truth of it. Time is not money. Time is life, and life isn't meant to be squeezed. Seneca would nod. He saw the empire galloping toward indulgence, toward ever faster conquests, ever noisier displays. But he held the line. In his letters, he constantly reminded Lucilius to walk, to breathe, to move through life like a person aware they will one day die not morbidly, but meaningfully. Because what is slowness, really? It's respect for the moment, for your own nervous system, for the words you're about to say, in the consequences they invite. You turn a corner now and find yourself in a shaded alley where ivy coils like thoughts left unfinished. Seneca pauses, runs his hand over the crumbling brick. Even this, he says, was once the latest thing. You smile. The fastest things fade the quickest. There's a bakery now just opened, steam pouring into the street. You breathe in the scent of yeast and ash and rosemary, and you don't rush inside. You let the smell nourish you first. This is the pace of a life unpossessed, of a soul that no longer confuses movement with meaning. Modern thinkers might call this mindfulness or simplicity, but here it feels older than any label. It feels like returning to your own rhythm, to a body that was never built for endless acceleration. You keep walking, not toward success, not toward optimization, but toward presence. And with every slow step, you remember, restraint isn't just what you hold back. It's what you allow to arrive on its own time. You round another corner. The sun crests the buildings now. The city begins to wake. But you are already awake. Because you did not run here. You walked. Now you're standing before a statue. Not a grand, polished monument in some imperial plaza, but a quiet figure tucked in the back of a workshop. It's unfinished. You can see where the chisel marks pause, one leg still rough, one hand only suggested by a blocky silhouette. The marble shimmers in places, dull in others. And somehow, it's more beautiful because of that. Seneca stands beside you, arms folded, studying the work with neither urgency nor disappointment. Restraint, he says softly, also means knowing when not to finish. The sculptor is not here. Perhaps he walked away for the day, perhaps forever. Perhaps the work was never meant to be complete, and perhaps that's the entire point. You run your fingers along the shoulder of the statue smooth, then suddenly jagged. The transition is honest. You're witnessing a moment of creation paused, not ruined. Restraint in this chamber is creative, a kind of discipline that honors the gap between perfection and presence. Seneca, in his writings, often touched on sufficiency. He wrote of people rushing to complete things, projects, conversations, relationships, not because they were ready, but because they couldn't bear the tension of the in-between. And yet, in one letter, he remarked that sometimes it is nobler to pause than to perfect. That phrase hangs in the air now, like dust in slanting light. Modern thinkers tend to obsess over completion, the checklist, the 10,000-hour mastery, the hustle. But here in the sculptor's workshop, surrounded by shavings and half-shaped limbs, you feel a truth that doesn't translate well into bullet points. Some things are more potent in their becoming than in their arrival. There's an obscure tale, half memory, half myth, that Seneca once refused to revise a particular essay, even though he admitted it was flawed. Let it stand, he said. It reflects me as I was, not as I wish to appear. That's restraint, too, letting the world see your drafts. You sit now on a nearby stool. The tools of the sculptor lie untouched, arranged with care. A chisel still holds a curl of marble dust, frozen mid-stroke. Everything feels suspended, and you realize you're not here to finish this work. You're here to witness it, to be with what isn't done, to soften in the presence of things that remain unresolved. How many parts of yourself, you wonder, have you rushed to complete? How many projects or promises did you force across some imaginary finish line, just so you wouldn't have to hold the discomfort of the pause? Seneca understood that restlessness can be disguised as productivity, that some people decorate their lives with completed things, never realizing they've left no room for surprise, no space for slow grace. You rise and take one final look at the statue. The face is only half formed, one eye finished, one still misted in stone, and yet it sees you. It sees you and forgives you and reminds you that you, too, are allowed to be incomplete. Restraint isn't just about doing less. Sometimes it's about being okay with less done. Not out of laziness, but reverence. You leave the workshop slowly, the scent of dust and lime clinging softly to your breath. Behind you, the statue stays just as it is. Still waiting, still worthy, still becoming. You step out from the sculptor's studio into a quiet street bathed in late-day gold. The sky stretches overhead like soft cloth pulled taut, its warmth pressing gently against your skin. And there's a stillness in the air, not the stillness of peace, but the stillness that often follows pain. You walk slower now, not because you're tired, but because the world feels tender. Ahead, there's a doorway slightly ajar. A curtain stirs in the breeze. You enter without knocking, dreams require no invitation, and find yourself in a home dressed for mourning. A woman sits by a window, staring not out, but into herself. A man stands by a bowl of water, washing his face for the third time, though it is already clean. The air is perfumed with rosemary, salt, and something else, grief that has settled into the walls. Seneca is here, too, not standing, sitting, his hands folded in his lap, his voice even lower than usual. This is not a home of tragedy, it's a home of restraint within it. Because even sorrow, he believed, could be shaped, not suppressed, not ignored, but guided, honored without being obeyed. He once wrote, "Tears are not from weakness, but from truth. Let them fall, but do not let them drown you." This is where restraint takes on its most misunderstood form. People often assume stoicism means being unmoved, unaffected, but Seneca would say no, feel deeply, just not reactively. Do not let sorrow rule like a king when it can sit like a guest. You sit near the window, beside the woman. She doesn't look at you, but her hand brushes yours for a moment, not in desperation, but in recognition. She's not asking for comfort, she's practicing it. There's an old story, half true, half prayer, that Seneca lost a child. No scroll confirms it, but in several letters, he writes to grieving friends with a kind of empathy too personal to be abstract. He never says, "Don't feel." He says, "Feel, but let it teach you something." Modern psychologists call it emotional regulation. But here, in this shadowed Roman room, it feels deeper. It feels like weathering. Because there is strength in allowing pain in and still choosing not to let it renovate the whole house. The man with the clean face lowers his hands. He says nothing, but you feel something settle in the room, like a long breath finally exhaled. Seneca once warned that to mourn endlessly is to protest the nature of things. He didn't mean to scold, he meant to invite balance. To live in a world where love exists is to accept loss as part of the contract. Restraint in grief doesn't look like a stoic face frozen in stone. It looks like a person crying quietly, then folding the laundry. It looks like lighting a lamp, even when no one's coming home. You glance around the room and notice the symbols of gentle continuation. A fire still smolders in the hearth. A cup has been washed and left to dry. A book is open, not read, perhaps, but still ready. This is what it means to feel without falling. You move toward the hearth, and Seneca is there beside you again. He doesn't offer platitudes. He simply puts another log on the fire. The flames don't flare. They just rise, slow and steady. The room accepts them. That's what restraint can offer in sorrow. Not escape, but steadiness. Not denial, but dignity. You think now of your own griefs, those quiet losses folded into your history, like creases in paper. Seneca would not ask you to erase them. He would only ask, have you sat with them long enough to learn something? Have they refined you, or merely ruled you? You sit beside the fire. Let the warmth touch your face. The window remains open, and the breeze carries a scent of chamomile and something faintly metallic life, still happening. And as the sky darkens into dusk, you feel not heavy, but held. Sorrow is not weakness, and restraint is not denial. It is the brave decision to keep breathing gently, even when part of you aches. But you're wandering now through a street you don't recognize. It's lined with shops, all tucked into carved arches and stacked on top of one another like thoughts in a cluttered mind. The signs swing gently in the breeze, painted in bright, eager colors, silks, spices, perfumes, jewelry that catches the light like laughter. But you're not here to shop, you're here to observe. And just up ahead, beneath a flapping crimson awning, you see a tailor at work. Her hands move quickly, threading golden fabric through a loom. Every fold glistens. A mannequin nearby wears a robe so fine it seems to hum. Passers-by stop to stare, fingers twitching with desire. The robe is flawless, but the tailor's face, it tells a different story. She scratches her wrist, again and again. Beneath the silk cuffs of her own garment, a rash blooms in quiet rebellion. The beauty she weaves has become her burden. Seneca would nod, not in scorn, but in recognition, because he knew how comfort can become an irritant, how luxury can scratch, subtly, until it owns you. He once wrote, "Wealth is the slave of a wise man and the master of a fool." And standing here now, watching the tailor work, you understand that not all discomfort comes from lack. Some of it wears perfume. You take a step closer and catch her eye. She doesn't stop sewing, but her smile is tired. You ask nothing, just observe. This is what restraint means here, not austerity, but awareness. The ability to enjoy beauty without being consumed by it, to appreciate silk but prefer cotton, when the day requires breathability. There's a strange little story, likely embellished, possibly apocryphal, that Seneca once wore an itchy tunic beneath his senator's robe during meetings, not to punish himself, but to remember that power is not comfort, that true composure doesn't come from softness outside but inside. And philosophers still disagree on how sincere he really was. Could someone truly preach simplicity while managing imperial estates? Was his discomfort strategic, a kind of theatrical morality? But maybe that's the point. Maybe restraint isn't about being perfect, it's about remembering what you're susceptible to, and refusing to be ruled by it. You glance now at your own sleeve. Whatever it is, fabric, worry, reputation, it has its own kind of itch, doesn't it? That subtle restlessness, that desire to be seen a certain way, to fit, to shine. Seneca would say, wear it if you must, but don't mistake it for who you are. The wind stirs the robes on the mannequins. They flutter dramatically. One looks exactly like something a modern influencer might wear on a rooftop in Rome, smiling over a bowl of $26 olives. The irony makes you chuckle, because while the robes change, the itch remains. And restraint is scratching less, not ignoring the discomfort, but choosing not to build your identity around soothing it. You sit now beside the tailor. She lets you, together. You watch people walk by, some swaddled in fabrics worth entire salaries, others in frayed tunics that breathe like linen clouds. The truth is, both can be enslaved by what they wear, and both can be free. It's not about what you put on, it's about what you believe it grants you. You rise, brushing silk threads from your lap, and begin to walk again. Not because you crave simplicity, but because you're learning what it means to carry beauty lightly, to own things that do not own you, to let go of elegance when it itches, to be soft but not swaddled. And as the tailor returns to her loom, you carry with you a reminder that the finest robes are still just thread, but your peace, that's woven from something deeper. The market fades behind you like a dream that knows when to exit politely. Your feet find their way to the edge of the city, where the streets turn quieter, the stones looser, the noise replaced by the gentle hush of water. There's a dock here, ancient and creaking, with just one small rowboat tied loosely to a weathered post. The river is dark, slow-moving, mirroring the sky in long liquid ribbons. You step into the boat without hesitation. Or maybe it's not quite your step. It's the kind of dream glide that feels like trust in motion. Seneca is already there, seated with an oar resting across his knees. He doesn't row, not yet. He just waits. This is the section of the dream where the metaphor becomes almost painfully obvious. You sit opposite him, knees nearly touching, and suddenly feel at that wide space between impulse and action. The ocean between wanting and doing, between feeling and following. Seneca raises the oar, dips it in, pulls gently. The boat moves, but barely. This is restraint not as denial, but as pacing. He once wrote, "Delay is the best remedy for anger," and in this moment, it applies to everything. Delay before you react. Delay before you decide. Delay before you chase something that might vanish the moment you touch it. In this river drift, you realize how often your life surges forward on reflex. The message arrives, the heart rate spikes, the reply fires, the hunger twitches, the hand reaches, the snack disappears, the worry bubbles, and the doom scroll begins. Seneca's remedy rows slower, sometimes pause mid-river. There's a curious anecdote somewhere in the mess of surviving letters that Seneca kept a stone on his writing desk. He would run his hand over it during difficult conversations, not to focus, to slow down. One breath, he called it, the space between reaction and regret. Modern neuroscience loves this idea. Call it the prefrontal cortex, call it mindfulness, call it emotional regulation. But here, in this dreamboat drifting over a mirror-dark river, it's just grace. You dip your fingers into the water. It's cool and forgiving. You don't try to control the current. You let it carry you gently, but not recklessly. Seneca rows once more and then rests. You ask no questions. The silence is delicious. And here's the scholarly tension, because critics often wonder, did Seneca really live by this slowness? He wrote furiously. He advised emperors. He navigated betrayals and conspiracies. Could someone so embedded in action truly preach pause? But maybe that's what made it necessary. Maybe the more chaotic the world, the more vital the stillness between strokes. The boat begins to pivot slightly in the current, not turning, just swaying. You recognize this pattern. It's your own mind, drifting, reorienting, not being pulled, just invited. How many times have you followed a thought straight into exhaustion, simply because you mistook motion for meaning? Seneca knew this trap. That's why he taught restraint not as stasis, but as choice. You can move, you just don't have to move now. You take up the second oar, not to steer, just to practice. Dip, pull, rest. You're not rowing toward a goal. You're rowing toward balance. There's no storm tonight, but should one come, you sense that this calm would hold, that even in turbulence, the pause between waves is enough space to remember yourself. You glance up. The moon has risen, casting a silver path along the water, not a destination, just a glow. You row once more. Seneca mirrors you. The river carries both of you forward, not quickly, not with urgency, but with peace. You step onto the shore again, feet bare and quiet against the soft earth. The boat drifts away without a sound, as if the river itself absorbed it, grateful not to be steered too forcefully. Now you walk along a path shaded by olive trees, the branches low and unbothered. In the near distance, you see a small desk beneath an awning. It's carved from pale wood and worn at the edges. On it rests a single scroll, sealed but never sent. A breeze stirs. The seal flutters ever so slightly. You approach. This, you're told by no one and everyone, is Seneca's last unsent letter. Maybe it was to Lucilius, maybe to Nero, maybe to himself. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that he didn't send it. This was restraint not of tongue, but of message, of intention. He once said, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." And this scroll still wrapped, never opened, never pushed into the world is a monument to that wisdom. You sit on the bench beside it. You don't break the seal. You don't need to. It's not about the words. It's about the decision not to use them. You remember now how often you've hit send too quickly. How many thoughts, sharp as stones, you launched into the air, thinking they would land neatly. They never did. Seneca knew the damage of urgency. He knew how words, once freed, cannot be summoned back. Even a whisper, once heard, becomes its own ripple. And so, here in this grove, he chose quiet. There's a curious rumor, buried in the footnotes of ancient commentary, that Seneca once wrote a biting essay against a political rival, but burned it just before publication. The truth, he told a friend, can sometimes cause more injury than healing. It's unclear if that essay ever existed, but this scroll, this letter that will never leave the desk, it feels like that impulse, suspended forever in time. And you, too, begin to feel what it means to write something and let it rest. To form the thought, the sentence, the argument, and still decide it does not need release. Not out of fear, not out of indecision, but because silence in this moment is enough. You stand and walk behind the desk. The awning casts dappled shadows over the scroll, like lace. You wonder what it says, but then again, don't you already know? It says this reaction does not serve peace. It says this conflict is not worth feeding. It says, let it be. Modern life doesn't reward this. We are taught to respond, to clarify, to assert. To be misunderstood is almost unbearable. But Seneca offers a different reward, the deep, pulsing relief of not needing the last word. You breathe in the scent of dry earth and lavender, somewhere in the branches. A dove makes that soft, hollow sound that doves do, like someone practicing a lullaby under their breath. You sit again, just for a while, and imagine all the things you've wanted to say this week, the texts you drafted, the mental debates you rehearsed, the explanations, the justifications. And then, one by one, you set them down. You do not burn them. You just don't send them. Restraint isn't about holding it all in. It's about choosing when to let it go without needing it to land. You rise, and as you do, the scroll seems smaller, still sealed, still important, but now less urgent. You walk away light-footed, unburdened, and in that space where reaction once lived, something else begins to bloom. Peace. You're underground now, though it doesn't feel like descent. More like a return, a cellar carved into cool stone, lined with arches that echo softly as you move. It's not dark. Small oil lamps flicker in alcoves, casting a soft, breathing light. You hear the quiet clink of metal, and then you see it. A vault, heavy iron doors, left open. Inside, no guards, no keys, no curses etched into the frame. Just shelves lined with coins, trinkets, scrolls tied in gold ribbon, things that glitter, things that tempt. And Seneca stands in the middle of it all, smiling like someone who's already refused everything in the room. You step inside. The air smells faintly of cedarwood and age, not musty, but thick with the kind of gravity that wealth always carries. Seneca doesn't touch any of it. He doesn't need to. He turns to you and says calmly, "What you do not need cannot bind you." The sentence feels heavier than the vault doors. You walk past the shelves, gold coins stamped with emperors' faces, silver necklaces tangled like ambition, One scroll even reads titles of honor in gilded ink. You lift it, then place it back down, as if it might burn. This room is not cursed, but it is weighted. Seneca understood the strange chain that wealth can become. He was no stranger to money himself. His estate was enormous, and he loaned sums that would bankrupt cities. And yet, in his writings, he kept returning to the same point that only real poverty is dependency. Not the absence of money, the craving for it, the dread of losing it. There's a tension here, of course. Scholars still argue whether Seneca lived a contradiction. Some accuse him of hypocrisy, others defend him as a man trapped by politics, using his influence to do good. But maybe the truth isn't either or. Maybe restraint isn't purity, maybe it's presence. Maybe it's standing in the vault, able to walk out. You sit on a low stone bench. The coins do not call to you, but they do test you. You imagine what they could buy, what problems they might solve, what admiration they might generate. The mind spins, but your breath anchors you. Seneca would say, don't banish the thought, observe it, then decline. There's an odd story, little known, about Seneca leaving a banquet early, passing through a room of silverware so ornate it had its own servant. When asked if he admired it, he simply said, I admire its power to be left behind. That's what this vault is now, not temptation, not trap, but test. And you are passing it. Because wealth isn't evil, but it is noisy, and restraint is what allows you to hear your own thoughts beneath the shimmer. You look up now, and the ceiling seems higher. The air feels less heavy. You smile. You don't need to renounce the world to be free from it. You just need to know which of parts you'd rather not serve. You walk back toward the vault's mouth. Seneca follows, slow and quiet. The coins do not protest. The scrolls do not whimper. They stay where they are, unneeded, unbinding. And as you step into the light, you feel it. Not asceticism, not virtue signaling, but liberation. You carry nothing with you, and everything that matters remains. The air is cooler now. You've walked beyond the city's borders, beyond the forums and fountains and tailor shops, into a space not quite forest, not quite meadow. The land undulates gently beneath your feet, soft grass underfoot, the scent of juniper brushing past your nose like a passing thought. And ahead, you see it? A simple wooden shelter, open on one side, inside, a bed low to the ground, dressed in linen, a small folded blanket resting at the edge. A breeze moves through without resistance, the kind of place no one would design to impress, but everyone might secretly long for. Seneca stands just outside it, arms folded, gaze calm. He nods toward the bed as if to say, go ahead. This is the sleep of the restrained, not earned like a prize, not forced like an escape. Just there, waiting. You step into the shelter, lie down on the bed, and feel the subtle alignment of everything. Your spine softens, your breath quiets. Even your thoughts pause at the threshold, unsure whether they're invited. This is what Seneca meant when he wrote, "The greatest wealth is a peaceful mind." Because here's the truth. Gently rising like a moon over your chest, you do not need to be exhausted to rest. You do not need to prove your productivity to justify this softness. You are allowed to stop not in failure, but in freedom. Restraint in this space is the refusal to be driven, the refusal to chase, the refusal to carry what can be set down. And tonight, you're setting it all down. The worries, the to-do lists, the invisible competitions, the subtle striving for something shinier, louder, more admired. You feel the day peeling off your skin like parchment curling in a campfire, not destroyed, just released. There's a strange little fable, possibly Roman, possibly just poetic, about a philosopher who trained his body to recognize sleep as a choice. He'd lie on stone if necessary, eat only figs if that's all there was, and still find dreams waiting, not because he was indifferent, but because he trusted rest to come when the noise quieted. Seneca echoed that in his own habits. He didn't worship discomfort, but he did trust simplicity. He believed that peace was not an event, but a discipline, a muscle we stretch by letting go, not by adding more. Modern thinkers talk about sleep hygiene, cool rooms, no screens, steady routines, and yes, those help. But Seneca would say the greatest sedative is the absence of internal conflict. The feeling that you've said enough, done enough, wanted less, and trusted more. You turn onto your side, and the blanket shifts with you. The wind hums softly through the shelter's open wall. You're not locked in. You're not hiding. You're just still. And that stillness begins to ripple inward. Your jaw loosens. Your eyelids lower like curtains at the end of a play that didn't demand a standing ovation. The silence here is not emptiness. It's fullness, unbothered. It's a sound of everything you didn't chase. And in that absence, sleep arrives not as a collapse, but as a quiet agreement between you and the night. You will rest, not because you are depleted, but because you finally remembered how not to need so much. And that's the secret Seneca would whisper now, if he still stood at the edge of the shelter, that the deepest sleep is not the one we fall into. It's the one we no longer resist. You're dreaming within the dream now, still lying on the linen bed, but the shelter around you has shifted, not vanished, just become transparent, porous, like a memory retold so many times it floats. The trees outside are no longer trees, but shapes. The air is a slow swirl of color and hush. Time loses its tight edges. Even your body feels softly speculative, like a page half turned. And yet, you're more present than ever. You're dreaming and nothing is trying to climax. Seneca would smile at that. Because this is a dream without crescendo. No final triumph. No revelatory monologue. No orchestral swell that says now, finally, we understand everything. Instead, a steady exhale. A moment allowed to simply fade. This was the heart of Seneca's Restraint. Not just about food or wealth or anger, but about meaning, about not forcing resolution, about letting life end some days in ellipses rather than punctuation marks. He once wrote, "Life is long, if you know how to use it," but he never meant to use it like a plot. He meant live fully in the fragment, trust that incompletion is sacred. And so, here in this drifting lyric moment, you experience that rarest of luxuries, a story that doesn't try too hard to be a story. No twist, no tidy wisdom nugget, just stillness with feeling. There's a nearly forgotten anecdote from Seneca's final days. Some say that as his life was slipping away, not violently, but slowly, with ritual, he paused midway through reciting poetry and smiled. That line doesn't rhyme, he supposedly said. Leave it that way. He didn't care for flourish in the end. He cared for sincerity. This dream honors that. Nothing here ties up, nothing resolves. And still, you feel full. Because what if restraint, at its highest level, is letting the moment exist without massaging it into climax? What if the softest wisdom is the kind that lets things end with a nod, not a bang? You breathe. The air has a warmth to it. Not from sun, from trust, that you've seen enough, that you've felt enough, that not all dreams need fireworks. Modern stories obsess over arcs, characters must grow, tension must peak, but your soul likes meandering better, like a river that forgets to be a river and becomes a mirror. So you lie here, not waiting, not narrating, just drifting. The world no longer needs to hand you meaning on a silver plate. You've cultivated your own flavor, subtle, steady, quietly complex. You are the kind of person who dreams without demanding clarity, who walks through symbols and doesn't try to decode them mid-step. You are the kind of soul Seneca might have written to, one late afternoon, with no intention of mailing the letter. Not to teach, just to share the silence. And the dream continues not because it must, but because it wants to. A little longer, a little slower, without needing to arrive anywhere. The path is dim now, not dark, never dark, but softened, like the final edge of twilight when the world has exhaled everything it needed to and now rests in the pause before true sleep. You walk along this path barefoot. The ground is cool and smooth beneath your feet. Each step feels like a sigh let loose from the body. You are lighter now, not because anything has been taken from you, but because you've begun to set it all down. Ahead, the garden reappears. Yes, that one. The cypress trees still lean in that familiar way, like old minds sharing quiet jokes. The pool of water still reflects the stars, though the stars are gentler now, more like thoughts than fire. And Seneca waits there, not as a teacher, not as a figure, but as a hush. You sit beside him again, just as you did at the beginning. The stone is warm from the memory of your first visit, but neither of you speaks. There's no more need. This is not a conclusion. This is a return. He once wrote, "Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end." But that wasn't a threat. It was an invitation, a permission slip to let go, to release the clenched jaw, the unfinished sentence, the need to prove anything at all. You look up at the sky. It's immense now, unburdened by edges. In one corner, you see something flutter, a scroll, a fig leaf, a dream passing into another. Seneca smiles softly, and you remember restraint isn't always about withholding. Sometimes it's about receiving less, letting less be enough. There's an obscure quote attributed to a friend of Seneca's. He could walk away from praise as easily as from insult. You feel the weight of that now, not indifference, not distance, just peace. That grounded knowing that your worth isn't on trial anymore. And tonight, it never was. The garden holds you. The pool ripples once, then stills. The cypress lean a little further, as if listening to a silence that belongs only to those who have stopped needing to be heard. Seneca reaches out not with his hand, but with his presence. A final gift. Not an answer, not even advice. Just permission. To release what never needed holding, to soften the grip, to step back, to exhale without asking whether it was earned. You lie back now on the stone bench. Your body melts into it, not heavy, not light, just here. And as the breeze hums through the garden, familiar now, old as breath, you let yourself rest. Not because everything is solved, but because restraint has done its work. You are no longer chasing. You are no longer resisting. You are simply, quietly being. The air grows even slower now. Each breath stretches out like a silk ribbon across the night. Your body is softened, like wax at the edge of a flame. And your thoughts, they no longer crowd, they drift, slow and luminous, like boats on a sleeping river. There is nothing left to seek. Not here. Seneca's voice is long gone, absorbed by the hush, but the feeling remains a kind of kindness woven into your bones. The kind that doesn't need to be loud, the kind that says, you've done enough. You've walked through silence. You've practiced refusal. You've let go without loss. And now, you're allowed to disappear into the gentlest part of yourself, the part that never asked for more, because it always knew this moment would come. No alerts, no endings, just a slow, sliding drift into the deep, private ocean of sleep. Let your fingers relax. Let your jaw release. Let your heart settle like dusk on old stones. There is nothing to fix, nothing to finish, nothing to fear. Tonight, the world is held together by the quietest kind of power, and so are you.